Yo, what's up guys, this is Oxy and I'm very excited to present you my newest plugin OxyWave, which just launched when this video goes up. And if you wanna try it for yourself, we do have a free demo on the website. It's for Windows and Mac, VST3 or audio unit, so it works in most DAWs that you guys use. Many of you might already have a good idea of what this does, but to keep it short, it's basically a host-synced, sample-accurate multi-FX modulation utility using these multi-segment envelope LFOs. So as you can see, we have this curve right here, kind of cycles through with this indicator. We can set the speed of that up here, so it's currently set to run at rhythmic fractions of the host tempo. We can set it really slow as well, really fast. What host sync means is, right now it's just extrapolating the position from the host tempo, but if we actually play back, you can see it syncs to the playhead, like if we jump around. And of course, if we change the tempo, also changes its speed. This is of course perfect for like all kinds of sequence modulation patterns, all kinds of utilities. You can also adjust the length of these fractions right here to be triplets or dotted. And of course you can also unsync from the host tempo, and then you have free weight of up to 5 kHz, which would be like more amplitude or ring modulation territory. Then instead of just the raw host sync, we also have audio and MIDI retriggers with like different modes. This is quite in depth, you will see it in a bit. Audio of course can be internal or external. Moving on to like the centerpiece, you can see you have this huge view of this curve. You can already see you have different points, and you can insert new points by just double clicking on an empty spot, and you can delete the point again by double clicking on a point. Then you also have these transitions between the points with these handles, which can be dragged to like skew the transition. You can also reset it when you hold Command or Control, and then really cool, you can change the transitions to different functions. So right now it's like a linear bass function, but for example you can have this more continuous run or two-sided, also periodic, which is quite cool. Don't see that often. And the quantized stairs. Of course, this also has a lot of different UX features, so you can do selections, move them around, snap to the grid while holding Alt or Option. Of course, that works with single points too. Drag the edges. Also, you can change all the transitions at once. You can also zoom this view like to your mouse cursor by holding Command or Control and then scrolling. If you just scroll without the key pressed, then you move around. Of course, can also drag this. You also got a huge menu of different features. You can save shapes. This is actually where you set the default preset and deleted areas, copy and paste flows, of course reset. You can select all points at once, and some tools like this mirror, for example. You can easily swap around the curve for different presets. So here we have some docking ones, also trims, different utilities basically, some classic LFOs, some trans gates, some softer gates. Then we have two visual features up here, really important, the grid. So you have two axes, and you can also drag them at the same time. This feature is actually quite important because it is where your points snap to when you hold Alt or Option while dragging them. And if you have a longer sequence, you would probably put this really high so you can set the points more precisely. Then the scopes, just in the oscilloscope, right now it's set to input and output at the same time, so they are kind of overlaid. You can also have the input and output individually or disable it entirely, and really cool, you can show the output with the external sidechain so you can see how that overlaps. I'll show that later in the video when I actually play back some sound. I guess most of you have already spotted it. We actually don't have just one curve, but actually three. The currently selected one is always in the foreground and the other is shown in the background. The way we switch these is down here, kind of like a tab view. You can also see that these parameters right here, they change, so they are unique to each stage. And all these up here, they are global. As you can see right now, this is in multiband mode. You have this spectral view right here where you can drag the crossovers really intuitively. Of course, you can change the gains as well, also mute, solo, bypass. But don't be deceived by this, because this isn't just multiband. You can also use these three stages that we have for like different layouts. Of course, up to 3 bands, but you can also do up to 3 times series. And you can see the name down here change. For example, the series one would mean that the output of the first stage is the input of the second, and so on. Of course, at that point, this kind of crossover is meaningless, so don't get confused when it doesn't actually do anything. Then up to 3 times parallel. In this case, you would have the input 3 times, but not band split. This is cool for like super complex textures because you can do different effects in each of them, and then they overlap. Some special ones, left-right split, so you have left-right and then a bus where both of them go into. Same for the mid side. For the rest of the parameters up here, we have the phase, which is also only effective if you have the layout 2-band, 3-band or 2+1 band, because it's the crossover phase response. You can change that from normal analog style filters to a linear phase crossover. This is basically the same linear phase crossover from OxyOTT. I think most of you guys who tried that would agree that it's a really great sounding linear phase crossover. Quite low pre-ringing, often overlooked. It's quite low on CPU. On some plugins you turn on linear phase and the CPU usage is basically 5 or 10 times higher, and for this it's basically more or less the same. This, as far as I know, makes this the first plugin that can do this kind of thing with linear phase multiband crossover. Then the slopes, just the steepness of the crossover filters. Then tight, this actually skews down the modulation signal. Lower values become even lower, which tightens it up, as the name says. It does this as like a post-processing effect after the curve sampling. Same for the soft right here. This is our smoothing, and just to show you what that does, if we play back a kick drum through this rather hard square shape, you can hear how it first clicks, but once we turn up the smoothing, the click goes away. Also really cool, we have this freely adjustable look ahead, which is, by the way, latency free at 0%. This is like how it would be usually implemented, so it's dragging behind the original shape. We can just move this forward in time, and at 100% it approaches the original value. Usually 50% is a good value for this. It almost reaches the original value, but it doesn't take that much space around it. Now I will show you the different effects you can modulate and also give you some sound examples. This amount right here is basically how much of this curve is applied to the effect. Volume is pretty self-explanatory. It's basically amplitude modulation. So for example, right now we have a bass ducking patch using the linear phase crossover, so you can have like a really clean ducking of the sub frequencies and then softer fades at the top and the total fade in the bass right here. For example, we have this really heavy and clipped reverse bass sound, and if we play that back with a kick, can hear it does sound stupid in the way it overlaps. So we can fix this by putting this kind of patch in here, and then it sounds like this. Also, to show you the sidechain oscilloscope feature, if you look in this area right here, you can see how good the phase aligns. Right around the offbeat, it doesn't align that well. So what we could do is cut the kick, and then we get a pretty decent alignment. Then of course you can also do the tremolo, stutter house kind of stuff. And of course you can do some sort of transcade. If we toggle this volume label right here, it will actually turn from amplitude modulation to ring modulation. Creates like a lot more grittiness and noise. Next we have the time, which is basically the growth speed time shaper thing. It can really do a lot of different patterns, especially on drum loops, but also like on melodic loops with the halftime stuff and whatnot. For example, we have the basic breakbeat drum loop right here, and I'm just gonna go through some of the presets so you can kind of hear what kind of stuff is possible. Of course, really typical thing in like hip hop tracks, the halftime effect. Instant hit machine if you put the right sound into this. If you put like really low amounts and it does like some slight detune. Then we got shift, which is a frequency shifter, and it goes from -5 kHz down here up to +5 at the very top. Cool thing about frequency shifters, if you put them at half mix, then they will actually phase with the input sound. I think that's used a lot in bass music and color bass. And I think if you want to do this phaser thing, then the second option is really interesting, because now the frequency shifter phase is actually controlled by the modulation itself. We can actually frequency shift now using the actual LFO frequency. That becomes interesting when you do the phaser thing, because now you can fully control the shape of it. I think there isn't really a plugin out there that can do this in like this sequence precise way. So pan and width should be kind of self-explanatory. For the pan, just changes how much is on each side. The width is down here, it's fully mono, and up here it's plus 6 dB on the side. So really typical setup for width control. Then really cool, the filter module. Be sure you don't miss this filter view. You can choose from a lot of different filters. I think those are 18 types and over 100 filters total. So we do have, of course, all the basic utilities like low pass, high pass, notch, shelves. They come in these clean variations that you would find in like typical modern EQs, or these ladder variations that you would maybe find in like a synthesizer. Of course, you can change the cutoff, the resonance. Spread is like a stereo offset. Mix is just a raw mix on the filter, and this is actually quite a creative effect, because with these filters they have like a phase shift that would create new dips when you mix it together with the original. So as you can see, it doesn't just linearly mix the two of them, but it actually has a dip, and that becomes really interesting when you, for example, look at the all passes, because those are actually flat normally, but when you turn on the mix they get these notches. When you, for example, look at these dispersers, quite crazy stuff. Also some phasers that do this naturally, those also have some feedback. Disperser combs as well. These are quite cool if you ask me. Quite unique filter too. I haven't seen this run around a lot. How this works is you set like a bass amount in here, and then you can modulate it at the modulation section. So just to give you some examples of what you can do with the filters. And of course, if you just throw all of the effects together in like random ways, you get some really crazy sounds out of it. Then we get to the modifiers. These are effects that are applied to the curve while it's sampled. So if you turn up this rate, it's just repeating, or if you put it below 1, it's like kind of zooming in. The bend is like some sort of pulse width skew to the side. That's actually after the rate, so you can make like a speed increasing effect like this, or decreasing if you want. Then we got the fade, which just fades in or out. You can also make this bipolar depending on what you actually want to do. You might need one or the other. Skew changes how the fade looks. Then offset just offsets the whole thing. Alright, now we get to the part that I've teased at the beginning, and this is the trigger modes. First of all, I'm going to show the MIDI trigger because that's a bit simpler. We basically have this menu where you can set up the note range. Usually you would just leave this as is. This is mostly when you have a clip where different instruments play on different MIDI keys and you want only a few of them to reach this plugin. Then the velocity, really cool. It reads the MIDI velocity and maps that as a scale on the modulation. And as you can see right here, we have these flat curves, but actually we will use the velocity to like scale it down and change the cutoff of these bandpass filters, which creates like a vowel-y sound. And also we have different modes here how the re-trigger behaves. The default would be loop, which would just loop like normally, and then re-trigger once, you get like a trigger signal. Once is like an envelope, so it only triggers once until it reaches the end, or you can also move this fader around and can also make it snap to the grid. Then stop, it either stops at the stop position or it stops when in this case the MIDI note ends. Mute is the same, but it snaps the envelope to 0. Alright, so I have this MIDI clip here which follows the melody of the music loop. That's gonna feed into this instance, and let's see how that sounds. Let's disable the velocity. Probably not the feature we'll use all the time, but can be quite useful, which is the delay. It's basically just a manual latency compensation. If you turn it to the negative, it's basically look ahead, but it's not like an algorithmically used look ahead, but it's just straight latency. But what's also really interesting is if you turn it up, that has no latency, it just delays the trigger. And what you can actually do with that is fix missing latency compensation from the DAW. In most DAWs, this isn't a problem with MIDI, but in FL Studio, if you route MIDI to a plugin, by default it won't compensate latency that happens before the plugin, and basically your MIDI timing will be completely off. So I can just demonstrate that. Let's say we have this OxyOTT here, activate linear phase, so has this 55.8 milliseconds of latency. And if we now play back that same MIDI clip, you will hear the timing is kind of off. Now the way we can fix this is we just enter the same 55.8 milliseconds in here. It should be pretty much spot on again. Then moving on to the audio trigger, starting off with the audio internal, which is just using the normal input signal as the sidechain. If we open this re-trig menu again, you can see it's a bit more complicated now. You can see it's like a histogram, and you get like these white peaks over the gray background. The gray background is the input and the white peaks are like the transient detection signal. You can tweak how that signal comes together. So this threshold is basically the minimum level the input needs to have to be considered into the transient detection, but also the minimum level the transient detection needs to have. So you're actually controlling two things at this stage. Then the filter, I would usually suggest you leave this more high pass, so the low end doesn't bother the envelope detection as much. Now the focus is an amplification for the transients in the detection signal. If I put this to 0, you can see this follows very much the input. With it fully up, it basically isolates it really hard. Only problem with that is you might miss some smaller transients, so usually leaving this around 50% gives like the best results. Hold, really important to prevent double triggers. It's basically the time that needs to pass before a new trigger can happen, and you can see that at the very top. The horizontal lines, they are the whole time, the vertical lines are the onsets. You can also scale the time for the envelope follow around. It's kind of jittery down here. And up here doesn't really isolate the transients as well, so usually like 50 to 100% is a good range. Up here you also have a gain, so you don't have to touch the threshold all the time. I'm gonna use that same drum loop to externally trigger the ducking on the music loop we had before. For that we just need to route the sidechain input. I have the audio external mode, then we can duck this music loop. If you think this might be a bit extreme, it's like the hi-hats and whatnot, like this is a drum loop, what you could do is low pass it again to get more of the kick and the snare. Another thing you can use the internal trigger for is like weird auto effects. For example, we have a glitchy patch in here that's random shapes using the time modulator. We have like a pretty clear spoken vocal right here.
I watch as you search for meaning in the chaos of life.
If we actually turn this on, it will completely turn into mass.
I watch as you search for meaning in the chaos of life. No, never My purpose is clear.
One last thing I want to show you, and we're doing this in Bitwig because it can do this audio rate modulation stuff in the grid. You can actually output the modulation of each stage to like a dedicated output. So you can already see I mapped them down here. So we have the CV1, CV2, CV3, and these just correspond to the stages. We can activate that way down here in the context menu, and we can put it to unipolar or bipolar. Just gonna choose bipolar right here. You can see it plays, and if we go into the grid, I have this sawtooth oscillator right here, and if I connect it to the output, it will play a sawtooth wave. And what we can do now is connect this audio in to the pitch, for example. Turn this up a bit. So lots of stuff that you can do with this. Anything that takes audio rate modulation, you could feed this into and control it, or you could send this to some plugin that takes an external sidechain or another instance of OxyWave and trigger it like that, or trigger like a compressor. And yeah, of course, you could also route this into some piece of hardware and get some modulation going. Alright guys, that was it for the video. Hope you liked it. If you have any questions or suggestions, just leave them in the comments, and be sure to check out that free demo if you're interested, and see you in the next one.